I discovered at 5:45 in the morning that apparently being a considerate neighbor was now a criminal offense in Meadowbrook Springs, Wisconsin. The snow had started falling around midnight, one of those heavy February dumps that blankets everything in sight. I woke up naturally around 5, looked out my bedroom window, and saw at least 8 inches of pristine white covering the sidewalks and streets. Living in Wisconsin my whole life, I knew the drill. Get out there early, clear the paths before people start their morning routines, and everyone benefits. Simple neighborly courtesy that my father taught me when I was 12 years old. I pulled on my winter gear, grabbed my snow shovel from the garage, and got to work. The cold air bit at my face, but the rhythm of shoveling felt good. Meditative, almost. I cleared my driveway first, then my sidewalk, then the path leading from the main street to the community clubhouse. That path was technically common area property, maintained by the HOA, but I figured I was doing everyone a favor. The clubhouse hosted the morning yoga class at 7, and at least a dozen residents used that path daily. I was finishing up around 6:30 when I heard the crunch of boots on snow behind me. "Excuse me, Xavier Rawlings, correct?" I turned to find a woman in her late 40s, blonde hair pulled back so tight it probably gave her a headache, wearing a puffy white jacket that made her look like an agitated marshmallow. She clutched a clipboard against her chest like it was a shield. "That's me," I said, leaning on my shovel. "Can I help you? I'm Patricia Henderson, HOA board president." She said it like she expected me to bow. "I need to inform you that you're in violation of Community Ordinance 7-3-B. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're performing maintenance on common area property outside of designated hours." She tapped her clipboard with a pen. "Quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. That includes snow removal operations. I was just shoveling a path so people could get to the clubhouse safely." The HOA has contracted snow removal services that handle common areas during appropriate hours. Patricia's voice had that particular sharpness that some people develop when they get a tiny bit of power. "Your actions constitute unauthorized maintenance and a noise violation." A noise violation. I was using a shovel, not a snowblower. The ordinance makes no distinction. She pulled a printed form from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. "This is your official notice of violation. The fine is $250, payable within 30 days. I took the paper, reading it in disbelief. Sure enough, there it was in black and white. Unauthorized common area maintenance. Noise violation during quiet hours. $250. "This is insane," I said. "I was trying to help." "The rules exist for everyone's benefit, Mr. Rawlings. If we allowed individual homeowners to take maintenance into their own hands whenever they pleased, we'd have chaos." Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Please submit payment through the HOA portal by March 5th. Have a pleasant day." She turned and walked back toward her house, which sat directly across from the clubhouse with a perfect view of the entire common area. I stood there in the cold, holding a fine for the crime of being considerate, and felt something shift inside me. If they wanted to play it by the rules, we'd play it by the rules. I went inside, took a hot shower, and did some research. The Meadowbrook Springs HOA had a thick book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions that every homeowner received upon purchase. I'd skimmed it when I bought my house 2 years ago, but never really dug into the details. Now I read it like I was studying for the bar exam. Turned out Patricia was technically correct about the quiet hours ordinance, though it was clearly intended for things like construction work and lawn mowing, not hand shoveling snow. But there were other interesting details in that document. For instance, The HOA was legally responsible for maintaining all common areas in a safe and accessible condition within a reasonable time frame. Their contracted snow removal service was supposed to clear paths within 4 hours of snowfall ending. The snow had stopped around 3 a.m. It was now almost 8. No sign of the contracted service. I made myself breakfast and watched through my kitchen window. The path I'd cleared was the only walkable route to the clubhouse. People heading to the yoga class picked their way carefully along it, probably wondering why the rest of the common area looked untouched. At 8:15, a white pickup truck with Midwest Snow Solutions painted on the side finally rolled up. 2 guys got out and spent about 20 minutes clearing the main parking lot, then left. They didn't touch the walking paths at all. Interesting. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. Photos of the untouched paths, timestamps, copies of the relevant ordinances. Then I went to the county clerk's office to pull records on the HOA's snow removal contract. As a homeowner in the community, I had a right to review those documents. The contract was revealing. Midwest Snow Solutions was owned by a guy named Xavier Henderson, Patricia's husband. The pieces started falling into place. The HOA paid Derek's company $20,000 per winter season for snow removal services. The contract specified parking lots and main roads but was vague about walking paths. And Patricia was the board president who'd approved the contract. I wasn't a lawyer, but this smelled like a conflict of interest at minimum, possibly worse. Over the next week, we got 2 more snowfalls. Each time I stayed inside and watched. I didn't touch my shovel for anything beyond my own driveway and the sidewalk directly in front of my house, which I was legally required to clear. The path to the clubhouse, which I'd been maintaining all winter without even thinking about it, stayed buried under snow. Patricia's husband showed up after each snowfall to clear the parking lots. The paths remained untouched. On February 14th, I got a knock on my door around 9 a.m. I opened it to find an elderly woman named Margaret Chen, who lived 3 houses down. She was bundled up in a thick coat, leaning on a cane. "Xavier, dear, I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "But I noticed the path to the clubhouse hasn't been cleared in over a week. I have my book club there this afternoon, and I'm worried about navigating through all that snow. You've been so good about keeping it clear all winter. Is everything all right?" This was the moment I'd been dreading. Margaret was sweet. She'd brought me cookies when I first moved in. I didn't want to make her life harder. "I'm sorry, Margaret," I said. "The HOA informed me that I'm not allowed to clear common area paths anymore. They fined me $250 for doing it. You'll need to contact the board about getting it maintained." Her eyes widened. "They fined you for shoveling snow during quiet hours, apparently." "I was out there at 6:30 in the morning, and that's a violation." "That's ridiculous." Margaret shook her head. "Patricia Henderson, how'd you guess? She's been causing problems since she got elected board president last year. Fining people for silly things, making up rules as she goes along." Margaret sighed. "I'll talk to some of the other residents. This isn't right." "I appreciate that. In the meantime, the HOA is supposed to maintain common areas. You should submit a maintenance request through the portal." Margaret thanked me and carefully made her way back down my cleared sidewalk. I watched her go, feeling guilty but also vindicated. This wasn't my fault. I was playing by their rules now. The complaints started rolling in that afternoon. I knew because I'd created an account to monitor the HOA's online portal, and residents could see all the open maintenance requests. By evening, there were 15 separate requests for the clubhouse path to be cleared. By the next morning, 30. Patricia posted a response on the community message board. Common area snow removal is performed by our contracted service on an as-needed basis. Recent snowfall amounts have not triggered service calls. Please be patient. That was a lie. We'd gotten over 6 inches in the last snowfall alone. But sure, let's see how patient people remained. The February 19th snowstorm changed everything. Wisconsin weather can be unpredictable, but this was exceptional even by our standards. The snow started Friday evening and didn't stop until Sunday morning. When it was done, we had nearly 2 feet of accumulation. I cleared my driveway and sidewalk, working in shifts because it was too much to do all at once. My back ached, my arms burned, but I got it done. The path to the clubhouse looked like an Arctic expedition route, completely impassable. Derek Henderson's truck showed up Sunday afternoon. He cleared the parking lot, struggling with the sheer volume of snow, but again ignored the paths. Several residents stood in the parking lot, and I could see them gesturing and clearly complaining. Derek shrugged, got back in his truck, and left. Monday morning, I got an email from the HOA. There was an emergency board meeting scheduled for Wednesday evening to address community concerns regarding snow removal and maintenance issues. All residents were invited to attend. This was going to be interesting. I arrived at the clubhouse at 6:55 p.m. on Wednesday, 5 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. The main room was already packed. I recognized about 40 residents, nearly a third of the community. That was unprecedented. Most HOA meetings drew maybe 10 people if they were lucky. Patricia sat at a table in the front, flanked by the other 2 board members. A nervous-looking guy named Thomas Wu, who was the treasurer, and a middle-aged woman named Deanne Foster, who served as secretary. Patricia's expression was tight, controlled. She knew this wasn't going to be a friendly crowd. The meeting started promptly at 7. Patricia went through the standard opening procedures, reading minutes from the last meeting, going over the budget report. People shifted restlessly in their seats. Finally, she said, I understand there are concerns about snow removal. I want to assure everyone that the board takes these matters seriously. A man in his 60s named Harold stood up without being recognized. The path to the clubhouse hasn't been properly cleared in 3 weeks. My wife nearly fell twice trying to get to her quilting group. This is a safety issue. The board recognizes that the recent weather has been challenging, Patricia said. We're working with our contractor to ensure better service. Your contractor is your husband, someone called out. I couldn't see who. Patricia's face flushed. That's irrelevant to this discussion. It's completely relevant, Margaret Chen said, standing with some difficulty. There's an obvious conflict of interest. Derek gets paid whether he does the job properly or not, and you're the one approving his payments. The contract was approved by the full board and follows all applicable regulations, Patricia said, her voice rising. If you have specific complaints about service, submit them through the proper channels. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. Xavier Rawlings, 217 Maple Court, I said. I was clearing that path to the clubhouse all winter. I did it early in the morning before people needed to use it. On February 7th, Patricia fined me $250 for performing unauthorized maintenance during quiet hours. So I stopped. Now you're all seeing what happens when the HOA actually has to maintain its own common areas according to the contract. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some directing questions at me, others yelling at Patricia. It took several minutes for things to calm down. Thomas Wu, the treasurer, looked uncomfortable. I wasn't aware of any fine issued to Mr. Rawlings. It was within my authority as board president to issue notices of violation, Patricia said. For violations of what ordinance specifically? I asked. Patricia pulled out her ever-present clipboard. 7-3-B, maintenance activities during quiet hours. That ordinance is intended for power equipment and construction, Deanne Foster said, speaking for the first time. She looked at Patricia with obvious disapproval. The board discussed this when we drafted it. Hand snow shoveling wouldn't qualify. The language makes no such distinction, Patricia insisted. The intent does, Deanne said. And as secretary, I have the meeting minutes to prove it. This was getting better by the minute. The board was fracturing in real time. I pulled out my phone and brought up the photos I'd taken. I've been documenting the snow removal service for the past 3 weeks. Midwest Snow Solutions has responded to 6 separate snowfall events. Each time, they cleared the parking lot and main road. They've never once touched the walking paths, despite the contract stating that common areas must be maintained in a safe and accessible condition. "Let me see that contract," Harold said. Thomas Wu looked at Patricia. "That's a valid request. Homeowners have a right to review HOA contracts." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded stiffly. Thomas pulled up a laptop and projected the contract onto the screen at the front of the room. We all read through it together. The problem became immediately apparent. The contract listed specific areas to be maintained: parking lots, main roads, fire lanes. Walking paths weren't mentioned at all. "This is inadequate," someone said. "The paths are common areas. They need to be included." "We negotiated the contract to keep costs reasonable," Patricia said. "If you want additional services, we'll need to raise HOA fees. Or you could negotiate with a contractor who isn't your husband," Margaret said. "I'm betting we could get better service for the same price." The meeting devolved into chaos again. Patricia tried to regain control, but it was clear she'd lost the room. People were angry, and they were directing that anger squarely at her. Finally, Harold made a motion to suspend the current snow removal contract and seek new bids from other companies. It needed a majority vote from homeowners present. The vote was 37 in favor, 3 against. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "This is highly irregular. We can't just cancel a contract mid-season." "Actually, we can," Thomas said quietly. He'd been reading something on his laptop. "There's a termination clause for inadequate service. Requires board approval, which we just got from the homeowners." "I'm the board president and I don't approve," Patricia said. "You're one of 3 board members," Deanne said. "I vote to terminate." "Thomas, I vote to terminate," Thomas said. Patricia's face went from red to purple. "This is a coup. You're all going to regret this." "The only thing we regret is not dealing with this sooner," Margaret said. "Now, I move that we also vote on whether Patricia Henderson should remain as board president, given the clear conflict of interest and the fine she improperly issued to Xavier Rawlings." The room erupted in supportive shouts. Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked," she said. "This meeting is adjourned." "You can't adjourn a meeting that's been taken over by the homeowners," Harold said. "That's in the bylaws. Sit down, Patricia, or leave. Either way, we're voting." Patricia grabbed her clipboard and stormed out. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. The vote to remove Patricia as board president was unanimous among the remaining 39 residents. Thomas Wu was elected temporary president until the next regular election. One of the first acts was to void my fine officially. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. The meeting wrapped up around 9:30. People came up to thank me for speaking out, for documenting everything, for having the spine to stand up to Patricia. I accepted their thanks graciously, but all I wanted was to go home and sleep. Margaret caught me as I was leaving. "You did a good thing tonight, Xavier." I just wanted to shovel snow without getting fined, I said. You did more than that. Patricia's been bullying people for months. Small fines here and there, arbitrary rule enforcement. You gave everyone else the courage to push back. She patted my arm. That matters. I drove home through streets that were finally getting properly plowed. The county had been working overtime to clear the roads after the big storm. My house was dark and quiet when I pulled into my cleared driveway. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Thursday morning I woke up to find my mailbox smashed. Not knocked over by a snowplow or damaged by accident. Smashed. Someone had taken something heavy, probably a baseball bat, and destroyed it completely. The post was snapped, the box itself was crumpled metal, and my mail was scattered across the snow. I called the police and filed a report. The officer who came out, a young guy named Deputy Mills, took photos and notes but said there wasn't much they could do without witnesses or camera footage. You have any disputes with neighbors? He asked. I explained the HOA situation. He nodded sympathetically. HOA disputes can get ugly, he said. People take that stuff personally. You might want to consider installing a security camera. I'd been meaning to do that anyway. After Deputy Mills left, I drove to the hardware store and bought a complete security system. 4 cameras covering all angles of my property, with night vision and motion detection. It took me most of the day to install, but by evening my house was fortified. Good thing, too. Friday night around 2 a.m., the motion sensors triggered. I checked the camera feed on my phone and saw a figure in dark clothing approaching my house. They were carrying something, but I couldn't make out what in the darkness. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's on my property, I said quietly, keeping my voice low even though I was inside. They're approaching my front door. The dispatcher took my information and said officers were on the way. I watched the camera feed, heart pounding. The figure reached my front porch and set down what they were carrying. Then they pulled out what looked like a spray paint can. They were tagging my front door. I couldn't make out what they were writing from the camera angle, but I watched them work for maybe 30 seconds before headlights appeared down the street. The figure ran, cutting through my neighbor's yard and disappearing into the night. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived within 5 minutes. I met them outside with my phone, showing them the camera footage. Can you make out their face? One of the deputies asked. No, they're wearing a hood and what looks like a scarf covering the lower half of their face. We looked at my front door, spray painted in red letters. Snitch. Charming, the deputy said. This related to the mailbox incident yesterday. I assume so. They took a report and a copy of my security footage. One of them walked the perimeter of my property, checking for any other damage. Nothing else seemed disturbed. We'll increase patrols in this area, the deputy said. And we'll review this footage more carefully at the station, see if we can identify anything useful. In the meantime, watch your back. Whoever this is, they're escalating. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my living room, watching the camera feeds on my laptop, jumping at every shadow. This had gone from an annoying HOA dispute to something darker. Saturday morning, I was cleaning the spray paint off my door when Margaret appeared. Oh my goodness, Xavier. I heard what happened. Are you all right? I'm fine, just dealing with vandalism. Everyone's talking about it. There's a theory going around about who might be responsible. I looked at her. Patricia or her husband Derek. He's been telling people at the hardware store that you cost him a $20,000 contract. He's not happy. He cost himself that contract by not doing the job properly. You and I know that, but some people don't see it that way. Margaret hesitated. There's something else. Patricia's been sending emails to board members. threatening to sue the HOA for wrongful termination. She wasn't terminated. She was removed from the board president position by a vote of the homeowners. That's completely within the rules. I know. But she's claiming the vote was invalid because proper notice wasn't given. Thomas is getting legal advice. Margaret looked worried. This is turning into a real mess. It got messier. Sunday afternoon, I was watching a Packers game when my doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed first, having learned my lesson. A man in his 50s stood on my porch, wearing jeans and a Milwaukee Brewers jacket. Derek Henderson. I considered not answering, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. I opened the door but kept the security screen closed between us. "Derek Henderson," he said. "We need to talk. I'm listening. You cost me a good contract, $20,000. I got bills to pay, employees to keep on payroll. You had a contract to maintain common areas safely," I said. "You didn't do that." The homeowners voted to terminate based on inadequate service. Because you got them all riled up with your complaints. I documented the truth. If that's enough to get you fired, maybe you weren't doing your job. Derek's face darkened. You think you're clever. You think there's no consequences for screwing people over. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Actions have consequences. You're right. Vandalizing someone's property has consequences, like criminal charges. I held up my phone. This conversation is being recorded on multiple cameras. If anything else happens to my property, the police will be very interested in reviewing this footage. Derek stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. I watched him drive off, then immediately sent a copy of the footage to my email and the cloud, just to be safe. I called the sheriff's office and filed another report. They sent Deputy Mills back out. "This is harassment," he said after reviewing the footage. "Direct threat, given the context of the previous vandalism. We can talk to him, but without proof he was the one who smashed your mailbox or tagged your door, we can't arrest him." What am I supposed to do? Wait until he does something worse. Document everything. Keep your cameras running. And consider getting a restraining order. With this footage and the pattern of incidents, a judge might grant one. Monday morning, I took Deputy Mills' advice. I went to the Dane County Courthouse and filed for a restraining order against Derek Henderson. The clerk gave me a court date for the following week and issued a temporary order in the meantime. I also contacted a lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who Margaret recommended. He was her nephew and practiced civil law in Madison. "This is an interesting situation," Robert said after I explained everything. "The HOA dispute itself is pretty straightforward. Patricia exceeded her authority in issuing that fine, and the homeowners had every right to remove her from the board presidency and terminate the snow removal contract. But the vandalism and threats are a criminal matter. Can Patricia actually sue? She can file a lawsuit, but it won't go anywhere. HOA bylaws clearly allow for removal of board members by homeowner vote under circumstances like this. She'd be wasting her money." He leaned back in his chair. "The bigger concern is if Derek Henderson is actually behind the vandalism. That could turn into a civil matter as well as criminal. You could sue for damages, emotional distress, that sort of thing. I just want this to stop. Then the restraining order is a good first step. It puts him on notice that law enforcement is watching. Most people back off at that point. Most people. But Derek Henderson didn't strike me as most people. The temporary restraining order was served on Tuesday. Wednesday evening, Thomas Wu called an emergency HOA board meeting to address ongoing community concerns. I attended, along with what looked like half the neighborhood. Patricia was not there, but she'd sent a legal letter that Thomas read aloud. She claimed the vote removing her was invalid, demanded reinstatement, and threatened litigation if her demands weren't met. The letter also claimed that I had defamed her and Derek by making false accusations about the snow removal contract. "This is nonsense," Harold said. "We all saw the contract. We all saw the inadequate service. There's no defamation." "I agree," Thomas said, "but we need to respond appropriately. I've consulted with an attorney who specializes in HOA law. His advice is to document everything, proceed with finding a new snow removal contractor, and not engage with Patricia's threats." "What about Xavier?" someone asked. "Is he at risk?" "Patricia's letter mentions him specifically," Thomas admitted, "but defamation requires false statements. Everything Xavier presented was factually accurate and documented. Any lawsuit would be frivolous." "Doesn't mean it wouldn't be expensive to defend," Robert Chen said from the back of the room. "I'd asked him to come. Frivolous lawsuits can still cost money." "Xavier should be prepared for that possibility." "Great. Just what I wanted to hear." The board meeting ended with a vote to formally reject Patricia's demands and authorize Thomas to retain legal counsel for the HOA if necessary. They also approved a new snow removal contract with a different company, one that explicitly included walking paths in the scope of work. It was progress, but it felt like we were bracing for war rather than celebrating victory. The restraining order hearing was Friday morning. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30, dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt. Robert Chen met me outside. "Derek will probably have a lawyer," he said. "Don't get rattled, just stick to the facts." We went through security and found the correct courtroom. Derek was already there with a lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman in her 30s who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Morrison called the case at 9:15. She was an older woman with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, the kind of judge who'd seen everything twice. "This is a petition for a restraining order," she said, looking at her papers. "Mr. Rawlings, you're the petitioner." "Yes, Your Honor. Present your case." I walked through everything. The HOA dispute, the fine, the meeting where Patricia was removed as board president and Derek's contract was terminated. Then the mailbox destruction, the spray painting, and Derek's visit to my house where he'd made veiled threats. "I have security camera footage of all the incidents except the mailbox," I said, providing a USB drive. "And police reports documenting each one." Judge Morrison reviewed the footage on her computer. Derek's lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, "did you visit Mr. Rawlings' home on February 23rd? "Yes, Your Honor, but and did you say, and I quote, 'You think there's no consequences for screwing people over?' "I was upset about losing my contract, but I wasn't threatening him." "It certainly sounds like a threat to me, particularly in the context of the prior vandalism." Judge Morrison looked at Derek's lawyer. "Does your client have any evidence to present?" "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that he visited Mr. Rawlings' home to discuss the contract termination. He may have spoken in anger, but he did not vandalize any property. There's no evidence connecting him to the mailbox or the spray painting. But there is evidence of him making threatening statements after those incidents occurred," Judge Morrison said. "That's sufficient for a temporary restraining order, which I'm converting to a permanent order for 1 year. Mr. Henderson, you are to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Rawlings, his home, and his workplace. You are not to contact him directly or indirectly. Violation of this order will result in arrest and criminal charges. Do you understand?" Derek's face was red. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Now I'm also going to recommend that the district attorney's office review this case for possible criminal charges related to the vandalism. If the investigation finds sufficient evidence, Mr. Henderson, you could be facing more serious consequences. We left the courthouse with a protective order in place. Robert seemed pleased. That went well, he said. Judge Morrison doesn't mess around. Derek will think twice before approaching you again. What about Patricia? Think she'll actually sue, honestly? Probably not. She's angry and making noise, but any lawyer she talks to will tell her she doesn't have a case. My guess is she'll bluster for a few more weeks and then go quiet. I hoped he was right. February turned into March. The protective order seemed to work. Derek stayed away, and there were no more incidents at my house. The new snow removal company was doing an excellent job, clearing not just the parking lots but all the walking paths within hours of each snowfall. Patricia sent one more legal letter to the HOA, threatening litigation, but nothing came of it. Thomas Wu and the board held steady, refusing to negotiate or back down. Then, on March 15th, I got a call from Deputy Mills. Xavier, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've been investigating the vandalism incidents and we've got a break. What kind of break? Your neighbor 2 doors down, the Johnsons. Turns out they have a security camera that covers part of the street. We reviewed their footage from the night your mailbox was destroyed. Got a clear shot of Derek Henderson's pickup truck driving by at 2:13 a.m., slowing down near your property, then leaving the area. Same truck, same plates. My heart started pounding. That's not proof he smashed the mailbox. No, but it places him at the scene at the right time. Then we pulled traffic camera footage from the main road. His truck entered the neighborhood at 2:05 a.m. and left at 2:20 a.m. No other reason for him to be here at that hour, except his house is on the other side of town. What happens now? We're presenting the evidence to the district attorney. Given the restraining order and the threatening statements, plus this footage, I think they'll file charges. Probably criminal mischief and vandalism for the mailbox, possibly harassment. What about the spray painting? Harder to prove. The person in that footage is completely covered. We can't definitively identify them. But the mailbox case is solid. 3 days later, Derek Henderson was arrested and charged with third-degree criminal mischief and harassment. The news spread through Meadowbrook Springs like wildfire. Patricia sent a furious email to the entire HOA mailing list, claiming her husband was being persecuted because of a vendetta, and that I had orchestrated a witch hunt. Thomas Wu responded with a calm, factual email explaining that the charges were based on evidence uncovered by law enforcement and had nothing to do with the HOA. I started getting phone calls from neighbors offering support. Margaret brought over a casserole. Harold stopped by to shake my hand. Even people I'd never spoken to before were reaching out. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Derek's case moved through the system faster than I expected. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal. He pled guilty to criminal mischief, a misdemeanor, in exchange for the harassment charge being dropped. The sentence was 200 hours of community service, restitution to me for the mailbox and cleaning costs, and 2 years of probation. Not exactly harsh, but it was something. And it was on his record now. Patricia filed for divorce 3 weeks later. The HOA gossip mill went into overdrive. Apparently she'd been telling people she had no idea Derek was behind the vandalism and felt betrayed that he'd put their family in that position. Whether that was true or just damage control, I couldn't say. The spring HOA elections happened in April. Patricia didn't run for any board position. Neither did Derek, obviously. Thomas Wu ran for president and won by a landslide. Deanne Foster remained as secretary. A guy named Carlos Martinez was elected treasurer. The new board's first act was to conduct a full review of all contracts and financial dealings from Patricia's tenure. They found some other questionable decisions, including a landscaping contract with another company owned by a relative. Nothing criminal, but ethically dubious. The board terminated those contracts and implemented new conflict of interest policies. At the May board meeting, Thomas publicly thanked me for having the courage to speak up about improper practices, and presented me with a formal letter rescinding my fine and apologizing on behalf of the HOA. It was a small thing, really, just a piece of paper, but it felt like vindication. Summer arrived, and with it came a different kind of neighborhood activity. Block parties, kids playing in the streets, people actually talking to each other instead of hiding behind closed doors and angry emails. The HOA felt less like an adversarial bureaucracy and more like an actual community. I started shoveling the path to the clubhouse again that following winter. Nobody fined me. In fact, Thomas sent out an email thanking the community volunteers who help maintain our common areas and encouraging more residents to pitch in. Patricia moved out of Meadowbrook Springs in November, selling her house and relocating to somewhere in Illinois. I heard through the grapevine that she was already causing problems with her new HOA, complaining about everything from lawn heights to mailbox colors. Some people never learn. Derek finished his community service and kept his head down. I saw him occasionally around town, but we never spoke. The restraining order was still in effect, and he seemed content to keep his distance. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a suburban neighborhood where the Great Snow Shoveling Rebellion had entered local legend. People joked about it at community events. Margaret Cross stitched "Shovel the Walk" or "Face the Hawk" on a pillow and gave it to me as a Christmas present. I kept that pillow on my couch as a reminder. Not of the conflict or the stress, but of the fact that sometimes standing up for what's right, even over something as simple as shoveling snow, can make a real difference. The cameras stayed up, though. I wasn't naive enough to think trouble couldn't come around again. But for now, things were peaceful. On a cold morning in January, almost exactly a year after the original incident, I woke up to find 6 inches of fresh snow covering everything. I pulled on my winter gear, grabbed my shovel, and headed outside at 6:30 a.m. The air was crisp and cold, my breath fogging in front of my face. I cleared my driveway, then my sidewalk, then started on the path to the clubhouse. The rhythm was familiar, meditative. The scrape of the shovel against pavement, the soft thump of snow being tossed aside. "Morning, Xavier." I looked up to see Carlos Martinez, the new treasurer, heading out with his own shovel. "Figured I'd help," he said. "This is too much for one person." "I appreciate it." We worked together, clearing the path in half the time it would have taken me alone. As the sun came up, other neighbors emerged. Some helped shovel. Others waved and called out thanks. A couple of kids threw snowballs at each other nearby, their laughter echoing across the white landscape. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. The path clear, Carlos and I stood back to admire our work. "That fine Patricia gave you was the best thing that ever happened to this HOA," Carlos said. "Woke everybody up to what was going on." "I just wanted to shovel snow without getting hassled," I said. "Yeah, but you did more than that. You stood your ground, made people think about who was actually serving the community and who was serving themselves." He clapped me on the shoulder. "That matters." Maybe it did. Or maybe I'd just gotten lucky that standing up for myself happened to coincide with what was best for everyone else. Either way, I'd take it. I went inside, made coffee, and watched the neighborhood come to life through my kitchen window. Kids waiting for school buses on cleared sidewalks. Adults heading to work on safe, walkable paths. The community functioning the way it was supposed to. My phone buzzed with an email. The HOA newsletter, sent out monthly now with actual useful information instead of threats and fine notices. This month's edition included a reminder about the spring cleanup day, information about the new playground equipment being installed, and a notice about the annual meeting in March. There was also a section called Community Heroes, highlighting residents who'd gone above and beyond. This month featured Margaret Chen for organizing a food drive and Harold for starting a neighborhood watch program. Next month, Thomas told me later, they were going to feature me. Not for the whole HOA rebellion thing, but for consistently maintaining the clubhouse path and helping other residents with snow removal. I told him that wasn't necessary, but he insisted. People should know who their real neighbors are, he said. I supposed he was right. The spring came and went. Summer brought barbecues and pool parties at the community clubhouse, now well-maintained and welcoming. Fall painted the trees in brilliant colors, and when winter returned again, the cycle started over. This time, though, when the snow fell, I wasn't the only one out there shoveling at odd hours. The culture had shifted. People took pride in maintaining the community, in helping each other out. The HOA board supported volunteers instead of threatening them with fines. It was a small change in the grand scheme of things. One neighborhood in one town in Wisconsin fixing its dysfunction and learning to work together. But it was our change, and it mattered to us. I never forgot the lesson, though. Power unchecked, even in something as mundane as a homeowners association, can corrupt. People like Patricia exist in every community, drawn to authority not to serve but to control. Standing up to that isn't easy. It comes with risks, with stress, with mailboxes getting smashed and doors getting spray painted. But sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you have to stop clearing the path and let people see what happens when those in charge aren't doing their jobs. Sometimes you have to document everything, speak up at meetings and refuse to be bullied by arbitrary rules and petty tyrants. And sometimes, if you're lucky, other people find their voices too. They stand up alongside you. They vote for change. They create something better than what existed before. That's what happened in Meadowbrook Springs. One fine for shoveling too early snowballed, if you'll pardon the pun, into a complete transformation of how the community operated. Was it worth the hassle? The vandalism, the threats, the legal fees, the stress. I thought about that sometimes, usually when I was out shoveling in the pre-dawn darkness, my muscles aching and my fingers numb despite the gloves. Yeah, it was worth it. Because now, when I cleared that path to the clubhouse, I wasn't doing it in defiance or to make a point. I was doing it because it was the right thing to do, and I lived in a community that recognized and appreciated that. The HOA board that once fined me for helping now thanked me for it. The neighbors who once stayed silent now worked alongside me. The rules that once served to control now served to guide. That was worth a smashed mailbox and some spray paint. On the 2-year anniversary of the original fine, Margaret organized a small celebration at the clubhouse. She called it the Snow Shoveling Social, which made me groan but also laugh. About 30 residents showed up, including Thomas Wu and most of the current board. They'd made a cake decorated with a tiny fondant shovel. Someone had created a humorous timeline of events posted on the wall. There were speeches, mostly joking about the Great Rebellion and the tyrant's downfall. It was silly and over the top, but it was also genuine. These people appreciated what had happened, how the community had changed. Harold raised his glass of punch. To Xavier Rawlings, the most dedicated snow shoveler in Wisconsin and the man who accidentally saved our HOA from itself. Everyone laughed and cheered. I felt my face flush with embarrassment but also with pride. "I didn't do it alone," I said when things quieted down. "Everyone in this room played a part. You showed up to meetings. You voted for change. You held the board accountable. That's what made the difference." "Don't be modest," Margaret said. "You lit the match, we just helped it spread." Maybe she was right, or maybe we were all right. Maybe it didn't matter who started it, only that it happened. The party wound down around 9 p.m. People filtered out, calling goodbyes and promising to help with the next snowfall. I stayed behind to help clean up, loading paper plates into trash bags and folding tables. Thomas Wu found me in the kitchen. "Got a minute?" "Sure." "I wanted you to know the board approved a proposal tonight. We're creating an award annual thing for residents who exemplify community service and standing up for what's right. We're calling it the Rawlings Award." I stared at him. "You're kidding." "Dead serious. First recipient will be announced at the spring meeting." He grinned. "Spoiler alert, it's not you. We figured that would be too weird. But Margaret's getting the inaugural award for everything she's done." "Thomas, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being the neighbor you've always been. That's enough." He left me standing in the clubhouse kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of a party celebrating something that had started with a stupid fine and snowballed into a complete transformation of community culture. I finished cleaning up and walked home under the stars. The streets were quiet, the houses mostly dark. My own house, with its security cameras and reinforced sense of safety, glowed with warm light from the porch lamp. I thought about Patricia Henderson, wherever she was now, probably making some other HOA miserable with her clipboard and her arbitrary rules. I thought about Derek, serving out his probation and hopefully learning that actions really do have consequences. Mostly, though, I thought about the community I'd found myself part of. Imperfect, sometimes frustrating, but fundamentally good. Full of people like Margaret and Harold and Thomas, who cared about more than just their property values and their own convenience. Inside my house, I made tea and sat on my couch, Margaret's needlepoint pillow beside me. "Shovel the walk or face the hawk," it declared in cheerful script. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Outside, the first flakes of a new snowfall began to drift down. By morning, the paths would need clearing again. The cycle would continue, but this time, I wouldn't be doing it alone. This time, I'd be part of something bigger than one person fighting against an unjust fine. I'd be part of a community that had learned to take care of itself and each other. That made all the difference. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., finished my tea, and went to bed. Tomorrow I'd wake up, pull on my winter gear, grab my shovel, and head out into the pre-dawn cold. Not because I had to, not to make a point, but because it was the right thing to do. And because I knew, somewhere in the neighborhood, other shovels would be scraping, other hands would be working, other neighbors would be doing their part. The path to the clubhouse would be clear. The community would be safe. And the HOA that once fined me for helping would be a distant memory, replaced by something better. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes refusing to back down in the face of petty tyranny creates space for real leadership to emerge. Sometimes one person standing up gives permission for everyone else to do the same. That was the real story. Not that I got fined for shoveling too early, or that I stopped clearing the path in protest. The real story was what happened next. How a community found its voice, how neighbors became allies, how a dysfunctional HOA transformed into something worth being part of. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing everything in fresh white. Inside, I fell asleep planning tomorrow's morning routine. 6 a.m. Coffee, winter gear, shovel, and a community worth fighting for. The end came not with drama but with quiet satisfaction. Spring returned, the snow melted, and life in Meadowbrook Springs continued its peaceful rhythm. The HOA functioned properly, serving residents instead of harassing them. Board meetings were productive instead of contentious. The clubhouse hosted events that brought people together rather than driving them apart. I kept shoveling every winter, joined by an ever-growing group of volunteers. The path to the clubhouse was always clear, maintained by many hands instead of just one. The fine that started everything was framed and hung in the clubhouse as a reminder of how things used to be and how far we'd come. Patricia Henderson faded into legend, a cautionary tale told to new residents about the dangers of letting power-hungry people run HOAs unchecked. Derek Henderson finished his probation and moved away, starting fresh somewhere else. And me. I was just Xavier Rawlings, the guy who lived at 217 Maple Court. The guy who shoveled snow, helped his neighbors, and accidentally sparked a revolution over something as simple as clearing a path. Some people thought it was funny. Some thought it was inspiring. Some didn't think about it at all, which was probably the healthiest response. I just knew that every time I picked up that shovel in the early morning darkness, every time I cleared a path before people needed it, I was part of something good, something right. That was enough. That was everything. And if some future HOA board member ever tried to find someone for helping out again, well, I had a feeling the community would know exactly what to do about it. We'd learned that lesson. We'd earned that knowledge through conflict and resolution, through standing firm and working together. The path was clear. Not just the physical path to the clubhouse, but the metaphorical path forward for our community, and I'd helped clear it, one shovelful at a time.